Hello, Kansas and Western fans. Today it's time for another in my series of how I'm designing the track plans for the individual scenes on my layout. And this one here that we're talking about is the Wichita Industrial Yard or Park. It doesn't really have that name in the prototype out in the real world. It's just a name that I gave it so it's easier to refer to an area of the layout. But what it is a collection of industries that are mostly located near the Wichita Yard. And when I was building the entire, or designing the entire layout, I designed this layout, or this Wichita Yard first with this gigantic peninsula that you can see. And in reality, on one side of the peninsula, or in reality, one side of the prototype, all these industries that you see along this wall are located on one side of that. So in the real world, and we're going to reposition here real quick. Okay, in the real world, you'll cross the I-135 bridge on the highway here, and you look to the south, and you can see the yard as it's laid out in that direction there. And then as the highway progresses, it begins to parallel the yard along this one side, the UP side. So this aisle, you could almost say, is very similar to how the highway runs along the elevator like this. So as we reach the end of the elevator and you look off in the distance as you're proceeding south, you see all these industries that I'm trying to represent along that wall off in the distance from the highway. Again, this camera perspective would be along the highway looking in that direction. I'm going to reposition here for a sec. So as I was saying, this scene that you see here would be continuing to look off to the west as you pass the elevator moving south along the highway. So that's the point of all of this. Now, since I'm building a shelf layout, and by that I basically mean all of the bench work more or less resembles a shelf, then we have the track in the foreground and the industries would be placed in the background. And this serves a couple of purposes. Number one, it makes the track very easy to access for both cleaning and access to trains when you're switching, uncoupling and all that jazz. And then two, it puts all of the vertical elements of the layout in the background so that they help break up this, well, in my layout, a big blue scene, but eventually it's going to be scenery, photorealistic backdrop, and keeps all the interest of what's going on in the foreground easy to see. So what that leaves is having to generally figure out how you want your track to run and then figure out how much space you want left for industries. And as you can see, there isn't much. Now, my layout, or my level below where La Junta Yard is about 20 inches wide. Where you can see that, that angle out, that goes out to 24 inches. And since I wanted to be able to reach in my lower level without hitting my head too many times, I made the upper level a little bit narrower still. This level here, I believe, is either 16 or 18 inches. I can't quite remember. But if you kind of look straight down, it looks like it's maybe just 2 or 3 inches less. But anyway, what we're talking about here is how much space I have left. So if you got 5 tracks with about 2.5, 3 inches off each center line, or 2 inches, I guess, then you can tell that we only have about 5 to 6 inches left for structures. And that's fine, because again, I like structures to sit in the background so they're out of the way of the trains. And although I do like trains to pass behind things on occasion, it's just a lot easier to both see them and operate with them, especially when you're talking about coupling and uncoupling. So that's why we have the general layout the way it is here. Now, these particular industries that I've chosen, I chose basically due to their proximity of their location to the Wichita Rail Yard, which again I mentioned is over there. And you're going to see some photos at the very end of this video about what I'm talking about, but there are a lot of grain elevators similar to that. And then this one here, off in the distance a little bit. And then much more closely, you have the Clean Harbors facility, which is literally on the other side of the yard tracks from the main elevator. And then off in a little bit more of a distance is this all-metal recycling plant, which doesn't look like much now, but in the backdrop, you're going to see all kinds of scrap piles and some more machinery for sorting and so on. The only thing that isn't close to the Wichita Rail Yard is this Star Lumber distribution yard. And I put this here for a couple of reasons. Number one, I think center beam flat cars are interesting because of their design, They're kind of neat to see as they go by, the way you can see through the car, and all the different lumber loads produce all kinds of interesting load options, and partial loads and things like that you can do. Plus, I really liked how the sheds themselves help to screen against the main line in the background. If you rotate over here to the right, you can see this is my Charleston elevator scene, which is in western Kansas. And this curve is my minimum 24-inch radius as it comes around. Is basically supposed to represent the main line coming from western Kansas and then all of a sudden appearing in Wichita, which is obviously a lot of distance to cover. And so I wanted these buildings here in the foreground to help break that up to where we're not just eyeing a train coming around a curve and then into this new scene. So behind this shed, I plan to add more trees similar to these to further screen that track. So as you follow a train around from Charleston Elevator around this curve, it kind of disappears from view, and then the next time you really see it is as it's appearing behind the distribution yard here. So that's the point of that. The actual distribution yard is more in southwest Wichita, but if you can kind of tell, this spur is kind of off separate from everything else and in the foreground, so it still is a little bit separated from the yard. Now, besides this lumber distributor, which I fit into place based on the footprint of the structures, and then added some styrene. Actually, I think this concrete panels come with this kit. So once I fit those into place and realized I had enough room for a single spur track, and realized I had enough room behind for the main line to come around, then I had to figure out how much space I was going to use for track and structures. And that became a self-solving problem, I guess you'd say. So we're going to describe each track and what their use is, and then you're going to realize that it became track before structures. So you have the main line coming around the curve here. I didn't want the main line in the background because that's where the structures were going to stand for all my industries. So at some point, the main line had to come back to the foreground, which I decided should be just right away. And rather than just making a curly-Q kind of thing, I decided to just have it head straight back to the foreground, which would then open up the possibility of adding turnouts along that straightaway, even though I didn't know where I wanted those yet or which direction they would go. So I settled on a straightaway to have my main line come right back to the foreground. And then I decided to have a little bit of space because since I already decided to, or had designed the Wichita yard and knew that I was going to have this engine facility here, right there in the middle that you can see, I wanted a switch lead to come off the engine facility and join the main line. Now, you could certainly argue, why didn't I put those turnouts much closer to this end? And I certainly could have. But once I started to lay this out, I realized the farther out that I placed these turnouts, the more options it would give me for switch leads or engine facility tracks, as you can see that they curve around that end. And we're going to talk about the design of the Wichita yard in another video, so I'm not going to get too much into that. But that's why I decided to have this lead peel off the main line at this point, because then it gave me more options about what I could do down there. So this track that we're centered on right here, right there, that's the main line, and it basically follows the benchwork edge until it needed to make way for all these engine service tracks, and then it went back around the background as you see there. So we'll rotate back to the other side. Now, with all these industries, and we've got a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, in this area alone, I wanted to have a small switching yard to give me room to bring a small train out of the yard, park it off of the main line, which is what this third track from the left is, and do switching based on the cars here and the different switch leads that I had. So that created a third track I had to have for the scene. And then from there, you have basically a switch lead track, which is where all the train or all the traffic goes to access these different spurs to these industries. So you had Clean Harbors there. Here you have all metal recycling splitting off there. And then over here, you have the lumber facility. And then on beyond, you have advent mills for that spur there that curves around. So all this activity can take place without interfering with the main line, other than a short train having to cross over to access the lumberyard. And so that created the need for this fourth track from the left. That's your industry switch lead to access all of those. So a train comes out of the Wichita yard, parks here on this third track that you see down the middle, and then from there can pull cars as needed and put them back into these different industries, all again without interfering with the main line. And then I already kind of explained what these fifth tracks are. Those are the actual industry service tracks that go to the industries themselves. So once I decided on the different types of track and lengths that I needed just to be able to work in this area, it became pretty simple and elementary to figure out how much space I had left for structures. Because if you've watched this series for a long time, or my construction series, then you realize that, or you remember that I agonized for quite a while about what industries to place in this area and how to do that. And once I figured out what track was going to be needed just to switch everything, then it became easy just to figure out, well, here's how big Clean Harbors is going to be, and I've got room for an elevator here at an angle, and so on. So some problems do solve themselves if you go through the steps in order that you need. I guess that's just about it for now, I think, in terms of explaining how I designed this area. As always, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask those in the comments below. I'd be happy to help if anyone has any questions about this or how they might be able to help with their own layout. But that's about all I can think for now. Obviously, I have a long way to go and to fill out this scene. And so hopefully it will look a lot better than it does now. But that's what I had for designing this section. And you can look forward to the next update when we finally start to talk about that big Wichita yard over there. So thanks for watching for now, and have a great day.